I'd like to call this meeting of August the 13th, 2020, Board of Adjustment meeting to order. Ms. Elliott, will you please call the roll?
Kathy Bontemps. Here. Troy Breathwaite.
Present.
Stephen Craddock.
Present.
Lynn Hicks.
Present.
Wait, that's it.
You missed me.
Oh, Carol. I'm sorry. Carol Bell. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. A quorum has been met with 5 regular members present tonight, so we are cleared to proceed. Next step is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda beyond what we spoke about with the other case earlier?
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion carries. Okay, next item is approval of minutes. What was the date of that meeting? August 13th. It's been so long ago.
August 15, 19.
April 11th, 19? August 15th. Okay, approval of the minutes from the August 15th, 2019 meeting. Are there any changes to the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion carries.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could just interrupt you briefly, we skipped over item B, the election of the chairman and vice chairman,
Okay.
and I believe Ms. Elliott's going to, are you going to cover that? the election?
No, do I normally cover that?
Yeah, that'd be, well, responsibility. Run the meeting while the elections are being made.
Okay. Well, we need to elect the chairman. Do we have a nomination for the chairman?
I nominate Troy Breathwaite as chairman.
I'll second.
Troy?
You're doing a great job.
All in favor say aye.
Okay.
Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion carries. I didn't really have a say in that, it sounds like, but, okay. All right.
And you need to elect a vice chairman, so you would, at this point, you could accept a nomination for vice chairman and vote for that.
Okay, can we get a nomination for vice chair? I'd like to nominate Stephen Craddock.
I'll second that.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion carries. Congratulations, Mr. Craddock.
Thank you.
Okay. So do we want to speak to disqualifications at this point, Ms. Womble? Okay. In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid conflicts of interest. Does any board member have any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board tonight? If so, please identify the conflict and refrain from any participation in the particular matter involved. I would like to disclose that I know the applicant here tonight. I've known them for a very long time. However, I do feel that I can maintain impartiality here in accordance with the requirements of the variance process.
I don't have any issue with that. Does the county have an issue with that disclosure?
County has no objection to Mr. Breathwaite participating in the hearing.
All right, thank you. I assume the applicant does not. No objection. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Do we need to make a motion to accept his, or no?
No, no, he just made the disclosure and there's no objection, so we can proceed.
Okay, good. Any old business that we need to address? Hear none? Okay. At this point, I'd like to begin the swearing-in process. But before I do that, I'd like to just kind of lay some groundwork of what this hearing is. This is a variance hearing. It's a little different than a normal public hearing where anyone could just come up and speak. If you want to speak for this hearing, you need to be sworn in. This hearing is a quasi-judicial evidentiary hearing. This means that it is similar to a court hearing and differs from more familiar legislative zoning decisions where general public comment is encouraged and required. Participation is limited. Any person seeking to offer testimony in a quasi-judicial hearing must be sworn in. State law sets specific procedures and rules concerning how this board must make its decision. The board must make its decision based upon competent, relevant, and substantial evidence in the record. This decision is constrained by the standards in the ordinance and based on the facts presented here tonight. Tonight's hearing is for a variance. Variances require a 4/5 board majority approval in order to be granted. Variances can only be approved on a finding that the applicant demonstrates that the proposed use will meet all of the variance review standards. It is incumbent upon the applicant to demonstrate through testimony and evidence presented tonight that the proposed use meets all of the variance review standards. Okay. So do we want to swear in everyone as a group or individually tonight? How do we want to do that?
The only witness the county will be calling is Planning Director Laurie LaCicero, so of course she would need to be sworn.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Bill Brumsey here on behalf of the applicant, and our only witness will be Mr. Edwards.
Okay. So I can swear in everyone at one time. Would you please step forward? Okay. Please state your name for the clerk.
Lauren, is this correct?
Joseph Edwards.
Joseph Edwards.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I don't know if there's a Bible over there, but please place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right. Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you.
Okay. So we only have the one case to be heard tonight. That is BOA 20-01, Joey and Laurie Edwards variance request. And at this time, I would like to ask the staff to begin the presentation of their case.
These are my phone just in case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do apologize for the technical difficulties, but thankfully we had a very, all the materials made it into your staff report, so bear with me as I walk through and quote page numbers. So this variance is for 436 Shawborough Road, the existing use, and it is a variance for an encroachment into the front setback from a major arterial. Shawborough Road, NC 34, is considered a major arterial. The property address is 436 Shawborough Road. There is an aerial photo in your packet on page 13. And it is AG zoning agriculture, and the existing use is residential. The size is 0.96 acres for the property size. So, see how much I rely on PowerPoint when I'm doing my presentations. So the applicant is asking for, like I said, a 2.25 foot encroachment reduction in the minimum front setback from a major arterial for their property. So a brief history of this property. There was an existing house on this prior to April of 2016. In April 2016, a demolition permit was issued for this property. And then in March of 2018, so that was April 2016, existing house. And then on March of 2018, the final inspection was done for the demolition, and the house was no longer there. Then in December of 2019, the county issued a building permit for a single-family dwelling on that lot to use, this new house would still use the existing septic system was in place. And it's important to note that when this was done, the house that was there prior to April 2016, a survey was not done of where the existing footprint of that house was located. So they submitted a site plan to the county, and the site plan was created, prepared by Rackley Land Surveying. For this document, let me get to the page number. 36. Okay, it's page 36. The page for that 3.B5. I don't see the page number. 35. It's going to be on page 35, but I think it's cut off in your packet. You can see this was the site map, the site plan that was prepared by Rackley Surveying. This was done off recorded documents, and this was not prepared from a new survey of the property. Sorry, I'm sorry, this is
Is that the as-built?
Yes, it's the foundation survey. That one is. Like I said, I've gotten too reliant on
It's the next page, 36.
36. Okay. We didn't. Okay, so this was the site plan. In my presentation, I have this without the notes on it, so you could have both what was submitted to us and then our notes, so you could see the difference in that. And so once again, I apologize for the technical difficulties in not having that. So the notes in red that are blocked in red, those are notes that our permit officer that we make on the site plan. You can see what she changed on there. But this is what was submitted to us, showing the setback for the new dwelling that was going to be built at 66.60 feet. That would very much adhere to that 50-foot setback, that 50-foot front setback from the major arterial. This is what we issued the permit for. You can see that it was approved as noted with the change from the proposed driveway, because there was already a driveway there, to an existing driveway. We have a very thorough review officer here to make these notes, and that there is existing septic there, and that it should be built per this, and that any changes to this approved site plan should be resubmitted. They began construction on the home, and in February of this year, we had an inquiry that about that setback. Someone from the public noticed that it appeared to be close. They did know about that, the additional setback. We notified the contractor, property owner, and let them know that this had come up, and we had ascertained that it was probably very close to not conforming to that setback, and we advised them that they would need to get a survey. And then what the foundation survey is on then page 35, where you can see that once the survey was conducted, that front porch, the front part of the front porch, did encroach into that 50-foot setback by 2.26 feet. So at that point, they were given a few options. One was to come before the Board of Adjustment to request a variance. Another one was to that they could encroach without a covered porch. We do have a caveat in the UDO that allows that. And they chose the route of coming before the board with a variance. So that is the highlights of this case. And I'm glad to answer any questions that board members may have.
Mr. Chairman, if I may have some questions of
Sure.
Ms. LaCicero. Ms. LaCicero, what are the other arterial roads in Currituck County?
158, 168, 34, NC 12. I would have to, more than that, I would have to refer to the UDO.
And what are the setback requirements for properties on those roads?
It would be the same for major arterial. Any major arterial in the county would have this required 50-foot setback.
Same as for this property subject to the matter tonight?
Yes.
Okay, and what is it exactly that is encroaching, what part of the dwelling is encroaching into the setback area?
According to the foundation survey, it is just the front porch that is encroaching into the setback. With the covered front porch is encroaching into the setback.
And absent a variance, what would be required of the property owner to comply with the setback requirement?
They could bring the porch back into line with the 50-foot setback. They could completely cut the front porch off to make it comply with the rest of the house. We do also allow allowable setback encroachments by the UDO. Porches, decks, patios, steps, sidewalks, and similar site features may encroach into the required setback provided they are uncovered, do not extend above the first habitable floor of the building, and do not impede the flow of storm water. These site features may encroach into a required setback by up to 3 feet for an impervious site feature or 5 feet for a pervious site feature. So they would be able to have an uncovered porch encroach into the setback, but the covered part would not be allowed to encroach into the setback.
So by removing 2.26 feet of the roof over the porch area, that would bring then the property into compliance? Is that
Yes.
correct?
So when you measure the setback distance, is it measured from the footprint of the porch, or does any overhang of the roof count into encroaching into the setback?
Eaves and gutters, the overhangs like that, if they're part of the structure, they are allowed to encroach, to overhang, if it's a true overhang. Let me see. Eaves, gutters, canopies, chimneys, bay windows, and similar building features that do not impede the flow of stormwater may encroach into a required setback up to 3 feet. So things like eaves would fall in that. But no, as far as if you're covered with the porch, that would not be allowed to encroach,
Right.
more so than what I read to you earlier.
So are we saying and I'm trying to, I don't know what the porch looks like. I don't know if it's a wood deck porch or it's a brick foundation porch. I don't know what it looks like, but I'm just trying to understand how the measurement is done for the setback. Is it done from the ground level?
Yes.
The footprint, so you're saying that the footprint of the porch is physically itself at the ground level encroaching?
Yes.
And it's not something above?
It's not anything that's like that additional overhang yes.
Right, okay.
Why the difference between a covered porch and a regular porch?
It's like something just like a stoop that you would,
Well, I mean, if we would take the roof off of it, he would be in compliance, correct?
essentially, yes.
So why do we have this rule that we have a covering, so when somebody's standing at the front door, they're not getting rained on? We can't have that because we're too close, but if we take it off, we're okay.
It does seem, yeah, I understand where you're,
Can you give me some kind of reasoning, because it's bizarre to me? If that doesn't make sense.
Because I think a smaller porch, like you're saying, may not make that big a difference. But if you have a wraparound porch, or depending on the size of your porch, it may be much larger. You know, if you're talking about a traditional ranch type house that has a small little stoop, but that may not impede, that may not be significant like that. But if you have a porch, like I said, a wraparound porch, it goes the whole length of your property. I mean, the whole length of your building. That could be
That would be significant.
that would be significant. That would be my reasoning behind why we have that allowance. That and that would be the uncovered porch that sticks out. I think that would. We understand that that's not likely to be closed in, create more of a part of a full building, part of that building. So then, so that would be another reason that a smaller porch without a roof would be allowed. Because, people could tend to, if you've got a roof on it, want to close it in, and then you're encroaching the main building is now part within the setback. So.
And I didn't mean to take your time there. I know you were asking questions. I just
No, that's fine. I was through with my question.
Okay.
Mr. Cicero.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a couple of quick questions.
okay. Do we normally go through questions from the board first before the applicant, or can we?
You can do it either way. If
Okay.
The board kind of interjected and had a couple questions. But I would think generally the attorneys would ask questions, and then the board members may want to follow up.
Okay.
And the attorneys may have some follow-up based on the board questions.
Okay.
I'll
I'm
be happy
fine.
to wait if you guys want to go first.
No, I'm fine with you asking questions if you have some.
All right. Mr. Cicero, what is the purpose of the 50-foot setback? What are we trying to achieve under the UDO with that 50-foot setback?
Well, it would to give extra space if any of these major arterials are ever expanded. Because we see it on 158, 168, how close some of the older houses are after they came in and expanded. And that's probably the main reason that we have that additional setback. So if 34 is ever widened or added a turn lane in for the length of it, all of a sudden people aren't losing 50 or 75% of their front yard, and they're right next to the road.
Okay. And I'm piggybacking on what Mrs. Bontemps was asking about. We allow the brick foundation porch uncovered to encroach into that. How are we achieving that purpose of the 50-foot setback as you stated?
Well, and this caveat, this allowable encroachment, isn't just for people with 50-foot setbacks. I mean, this allowable encroachment.
Applied to any setback.
Right.
If that's the goal, then how is that achieving the goal, allowing that brick foundation porch to be within the setback?
Well, I think that it would give enough flexibility to, and we're back to, it doesn't specifically say these setbacks or encroachments are only allowed in the 50-foot setback. These are setbacks across the board. And I know you're trying to get into the specificity of the 50-foot setback, but so we have this flexibility for things for like rear setbacks when you have a porch that you're wanting to put out in the rear part of your property. And we don't specifically cite a 50-foot setback. So I'm speaking generally, and you're asking me very specific about what that accomplishes there. So I would just have to say that it's not going to, this is an encroachment, a general encroachment that may not, they may not specifically address the 50-foot setback.
But the similar setbacks are there for a specific reason, and you stated in this case it was to allow for road expansion. you may have a 10-foot side setback there, that's for aesthetic reasons, or for drainage reasons, or for any other number of reasons. If this variance were allowed, would there be any threat to public safety if this variance were allowed?
A threat to public safety? Probably not.
Okay. All right. And all right. Now, you mentioned several site plans. Well, I suppose there was one site plan. There were notes made by staff on that site plan,
Yes.
and then there was an actual survey done after the encroachment was discovered. Did you have any reason to believe that Mr. Edwards, applicant, had any idea that there was a setback violation prior to the notice that you guys received from the public?
Could you restate that?
Do you think that Mr. Edwards was aware of the setback violation prior to you
No.
guys getting the notice?
No.
Okay. All right, and you believe that it was unintentional?
Sure, I believe that he was unintentional, yes.
Went through the proper channels to apply for a site plan and apply for a building permit with a valid site plan and the like?
Yes.
Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Lori, now I'm new, so you'll give me a break here. I don't understand why taking the cover off the porch is going to satisfy the setback. Because it looks like, I mean, I rode by the house, so I've seen it physically. And it looks to me like, well, if they gotta take the top off the porch, they just as well take off the porch. Because I don't understand why that makes such a difference in taking the cover off, unless it's, as I heard you say earlier, I believe, that with the cover on, it's possible that they could close in the porch?
Yes.
Wouldn't they
Okay.
have to ask for, require a building permit to enclose it? Because they would have to have electric and heat. And at that point, you could say, no, you can't because you're encroaching, you can't have it enclosed. I mean, they can put screens in, to keep the bugs out, but other than that, if they wanted to enclose it and make it part of the home, then they would have to heat it and put electric in, and they would need a building permit to do that.
They would, if they were doing something such, if they're not adding anything to the existing footprint of the building, they would not have to come back with an additional site plan. So unless either staff knows that would have an issue, if they just came in and submitted the actual construction drawings for enclosing a porch, maybe not necessarily come out that it's a porch that encroaches into the setback. A rehabilitation or a renovation, the church speaking, you wouldn't have to have a site plan shown out with setbacks, building locations, or anything like that. It would just be construction of the house itself. So,
if we issued the variance and said, okay, but on the stipulation that they could never enclose it and make it part of the house, if he signed off on that he would never enclose it and make it part of the house, and then this way later on, if he wants to take off the roof, he could take off the roof or do whatever, but it would never become part of the house, as you said, because that would totally encroach on the setback. Would that be doable?
So this might be a better question for me to kind of chime in on. To my knowledge, I don't think that you can grant a variance with conditions. I've not experienced that. I'm not certain. But it's important as we're working through this application and questions about the ordinance and things is that, and throughout, in your packet and in the ordinance, there's the standards set out for what is required to actually receive a variance and what elements have to be met. And so while we, and frequently when we're reviewing variances, we have a lot of questions like, why does the ordinance say this? Why does the ordinance say that? And certainly while that may be relevant, the Board of Adjustment is confined to what the ordinance says when we are talking about variances, be it an encroachment or a setback for aesthetics or drainage or whatever. We are required to follow what the ordinance says and within those guidelines. So I think I want to just remind you of that in terms of putting a condition on a variance. I'm not sure about that. I'll look it up while you guys are still talking, but.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I could answer that question.
Okay.
If you look at NCGS 160A-388D, that's where it lays out the conditions that Mrs. Wong just spoke of, and then following that in section D, and I'll be happy to read it, says no change in permitted uses may be authorized by variance. Appropriate conditions may be imposed on any variance, provided that the conditions are reasonably related to the variance. So that is, there can be conditions on the variance, and certainly Mr. Edwards would comply with that condition if that were to be considered, that porch never be closed in, because that's not the intention, and certainly would greatly affect the aesthetics of that house.
Right.
And the lights.
And as Ms. Womble said, as a reminder, I do greatly appreciate and understand that there are some things in our Unified Development Ordinance that sometimes may not make sense, in a practical sense in a lot of ways. And I think this whole discussion about covered porches and uncovered porches is directly from the UDO. That's an exception to the setback that's allowable in terms of encroaching into the setback, and that's specifically laid out in the UDO. Now, why they chose covered porches versus uncovered porches, I suspect there's some language in there that talks about impervious surfaces and pervious surfaces. I imagine it has something maybe to do with stormwater or runoff or what have you. I have no idea. I wasn't part of that development of that part of the UDO, but as an appeals board, in essence, we really are here to evaluate the non-conforming use and whether this board wants to grant a variance for that use in accordance with meeting the standards that we have for variance review. So we have specific standards, these questions that we have to answer, and it's incumbent upon the county to answer those questions in the negative, and it's incumbent upon the applicant to answer those questions in the affirmative, and it has to be all of them. It has to be all or nothing. So it kind of makes it difficult for us as a board. I wish we had more power to do more creative things, but we kind of have to go by what we have here for the most part. I just wanted to make that clear. Any other questions from the board for staff? I know I have a couple that I'd like to ask, but if anyone has any.
I do.
Okay.
Chairman.
Mr. Kratt?
Ms. Liz Cicero, am I correct in saying that when a property is zoned agricultural, the setbacks are 25 feet from the rear, 25 feet from the front, 15 feet on each side if it is not on a major arterial street?
Correct. So
And
a
if
20-foot, sorry, I'm just going to, just to reiterate, a 20-foot front setback, a 15-foot side, and a 25-foot rear.
So if this house was actually built on any other street other than the 6 major arterials, they'd be fine as it is right now.
Correct.
But because they are on the
Major.
major arterial, they have the 50-foot setback requirement, plus or minus the 3 feet for the pervious surfaces.
Yes. And I just had all the list of the major arterials. US 158, NC 168, NC 34, NC 136, NC 615, and NC 12.
Any other questions from the board for the staff before I ask my couple?
Yeah, what is the, now we're talking about 2.27 feet. I understand that from the, because it encroaches that much. What is the actual size of that porch? Because I'm trying to look at it right here, and trying to scale things out in my brain, and I'm just curious about it. Also, I have another question, that is, does the gable end, I'm assuming it's a gable roof on it, and it goes, parallel to the front of the building. The question I have is, does that porch have a gable end that comes out over the top of that porch? So it comes out over that way too. Okay, that's all I need to know.
Yes, on page 32 in your packet is the building plans. And it,
I don't think my page printed very well when I printed it out.
oh, I'm sorry.
When it was sent to me, email-wise, so. And the pictures look like the back of the house. I see it.
Yeah, there should be a picture of the front elevation.
Yeah, it has
That's
a
the one
long,
that I think is pretty much cut off.
it has a long gable all the way down the length of the house.
Right.
And then there's a shorter gable that
That's all.
comes out over the,
I have it on my
Front
computer.
porch.
Did you want to look at it?
Yes, because mine didn't come out very well.
Here you go.
I'm an engineer anyway, so I need those plans.
Right side of the,
Yeah, that's what I was
House.
thinking it would be.
yeah.
And Shuri has an extra packet here with,
That's okay, this is
okay,
the only page.
if
This is my
anyone else
page.
needs anything.
And just for future reference, if anybody ever needs a hard copy, please let us know.
Well, I have a hard copy, I just didn't bother opening the envelope because I printed it all off the other day. And everything else worked fine, but
Okay.
that one page with the drawing, with the sketch on it. Or the elevations, I should say. Thank you, that's it.
And how big was that porch?
5 by 14.
5 feet deep?
Yeah, this is probably about 5 feet deep.
Stand on.
All right.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. So you mentioned, you made mention early in your comments on about the existing footprint of the previous dwelling
Yes.
that was there, and that there's no record of the actual footprint of the previous dwelling. And my question is, does it make a difference from application of the UDO and the setbacks if the new dwelling was built exactly on the old footprint of the old? Does that make a difference, or?
Maybe, and I'll explain to you. If you're coming in straight for, a demolition permit, if you had known about the setback encroachment, we do have what we call an administrative adjustment part within our UDO, and I haven't done the complete exercise of if they had gotten the survey prior to the demolition and known exactly what the setback was then, and with the existing septic tank. This seems to be a case where we could at least consider that administrative adjustment for a setback encroachment. But it would have to qualify for that. And like I said, I have not done that complete exercise, and they may not have qualified for that administrative adjustment, but because we didn't have the exact survey of where the existing house was, we don't know. And, yes.
And would that have to be in the form of a survey, an official survey, or would that aerial photographs or anything like that suffice? And I'm assuming that would all be on the burden of the applicant to make that demonstration. If that
It would be on the burden of the applicant to make that demonstration. And this is where I was hesitant to go this route. And without a survey, using aerial photography and parcel in the parcel lines, it's a really good estimate, but it's still an estimate. And we're talking about not even 2.5 feet. We're talking about 2.25 feet that we're dealing with, that we're in there. And I would not feel comfortable making a judgment call on something that's close from an aerial photo, because you could have errors within that digital data that could be off from 2.5 to less than 2.5 feet.
Right. Okay. The other question I had in reviewing section 3.3.3F of the UDO with the dimensional standards and the required setbacks, it does talk about a measurement from the ROW, which is as the right of way. So I just want to make sure in my mind that the right of way and the property line in this case are one and the same. Or are they two different?
For that front
Points.
For that front property line, yes, it coincides with the right of way line.
Right.
They are the same. The
Okay.
front property line and the right of way line is the same.
Okay. And from a planning department standpoint, if the applicant cannot correct this seeming non-conforming use at this point, what is the planning board's what's the planning board's remedy, the planning division's remedy for dealing with that if a variance cannot be granted? Variance is not granted here. What would be your next step?
We would request compliance with the ordinance in whatever manner that they feel would best fit their situation, and we would still have that, they have that 3-foot encroachment. I'm sure it would not, I don't believe it would not be aesthetically pleasing to have the roof pulled back 2 feet, but we would try to find compliance in whatever manner that they would be willing to do. And if they don't, then unfortunately, it would be, we would have to take them do the enforcement process with them.
Right. And so in this case, I'm just trying to make sure that, so the roof really can't be moved back 2 feet because the foundation of the porch is already encroaching. Correct? Is that correct?
The roof could be, if the roof was even with the 50-foot setback line, the foundation of the porch could encroach, because we do have that caveat. And if you guys, if you have your UDOs, if you want it, it's in section 10.3.4 C, required setbacks, allowable setback encroachments. Porches, decks, patios, steps, sidewalks, and similar site features may encroach into a required setback provided they are uncovered. And because it's an impervious feature, they can encroach up to 3 feet.
So that's the part I'm not understanding, because if the foundation of the porch is already encroaching, and even if you move the roof back 2 feet, it's still, to me, I think that it's still covered partially, correct? Wouldn't the porch still be covered? And the foundation of the porch itself would be encroaching?
Because the foundation of the porch would be encroaching, but that would be under this allowable encroachment. allowable setback encroachment as
Oh,
long
so
as
so the uncovered portion of the porch would
Any-
be
Allowed to
allowable.
allowed to encroach.
Not a cover.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that.
Makes no sense, I'm sorry.
Okay. Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, one more question. Would you tell me again what the maximum overhang can be with eaves?
With eaves, it would be 3 feet.
Okay.
So, you know, I'm glad you asked that question. So in your mind, where are you going with that thought?
Well, the engineer in me said that if you wanted to do something, you could take out the walls and basically cantilever the roof or brace it from the wall up so that it's not, you don't have vertical columns, you actually have bracing at an angle coming up through. You may have to do some serious work about figuring out some way to put in some steel beams to make sure and cantilever, bring those back in and tie them back in the building, but you can, it depends on what it looks like, depends on how much more that overhangs the front of or how much it overhangs the existing 2.5 feet, because it still may be too far. I was just
It'd be
thinking,
about a 3-foot overhang.
was just thinking about that right now to see if, then what happens if that happens? What happens if you brace the roof? I know this is hurricane country and all that, but hey, I've built a lot of things in my life. And you braced it that way so that it's technically not there's no vertical columns holding it up at the outside edge like it would be now with the porch. That gives you, then this becomes 2.5 feet of overhang over the 50 feet back. I'm sketching it over here. I'm trying to play the game around it. I'm just asking if somebody could do that.
Maybe I'm gonna go a route. And we would have to look
Have
at the
to be
building plan.
engineered,
We'd
yeah.
have to look at the building plans. I would have to then defer to the chief building inspector and his building inspectors to review that. And you know, would he consider it an eave? Is it an overhang? Is it cantilevered?
Right.
So you're getting beyond. You know, I would have to rely on other staff members for their input to make a final decision.
Always asking the question. I'm not doing the design.
So.
Okay. Any other questions from the board for the staff?
When was that UDO all done?
2013, January became effective in January of 2013. Yes, yes.
Have they been issued a certificate of occupancy as of today?
Applicant says no.
No, we have not, because we've been waiting for this hearing before that. So, sorry, I was thinking about the affidavit that they were signed.
Okay.
But in reference to Mr. Hicks' questions, then it would mean if they did try to re-engineer the front porch area, it would still have to go through the review process with Mr. Nooms, the chief building inspector,
Yes.
That makes sense.
being that they haven't already gotten a certificate of occupancy.
Correct.
And this current condition that the property is in, you know, in the absence of us granting a variance, that certificate of occupancy cannot be granted. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Ms. Bell, do you have any questions?
No.
All right. Thank you.
Mike, are you going to can we have her packet marked as county one?
Yes, I would like to ask that the exhibits that Mr. Cicero spoke to during the course of her presentation be marked as county's exhibit number 1 and admitted without objection.
Okay. Okay, so at this time, I would like to ask the applicant or his representative to make his, present his case.
As I said earlier, I'm Bill Brumsey, attorney for the applicant, and I'm just going to make some brief opening remarks before I have Mr. Edwards come up. First, Mr. Cicero has given a perfect rendition of the facts. The facts are not in dispute. We're here to get the variance because of some reasons that Mr. Edwards is going to talk about. And the statute that we're working under that I pulled from earlier is 168-388, and variances should be issued as stated in Section D of that ordinance when unnecessary hardships would result from carrying out the strict letter of a zoning ordinance. The Board of Adjustment shall vary any provisions of the ordinance upon a showing of all of the following. I'm not going to go through the standards because you know them well. As also mentioned earlier, the Board of Adjustments can place conditions upon ordinances so long as those conditions mesh with the spirit of the ordinance. And Mr. Edwards is willing to comply with the condition as stated by Mrs. Bontemps that the porch never be covered. I'm going to touch on a few facts and some facts that are very, very similar to a case from the North Carolina Court of Appeals, Currituck v. Town of Surf City at 642 Southeast 2nd, 251, and I'll present that after Mr. Edwards testifies. But briefly, you're going to hear Mr. Edwards tell you that this violation of the ordinance was purely unintentional. He relied on a site plan survey, and an error, a good faith error was made in him pulling the distance to stake that house out, purely unintentional. And those facts are very similar to the Currituck v. Surf City, where a very similar fact survey was done, building permit pulled, owners of the property in good faith relied on the information that was in front of them. They built a home that was subject to a 7.5-foot side setback, and they built that home 7.2 inches inside the setback. The town originally granted the variance. It got appealed to the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals granted the variance. And the reasons stated is that the applicant had followed the necessary procedures, had erroneously relied on a faulty survey in good faith, and made an error that was not substantial and did not impact public safety, and still allowed substantial compliance with the ordinance that was in question there. Almost the exact same fact pattern as we're dealing with here. With that, I'll call up Mr. Edwards. And Mr. Edwards,
before you go, are you going to enter that Court of Appeals case into the record?
I'm going to enter. Yes.
Can you give me that side again?
Yeah, I got a copy.
Okay, awesome.
And I do ask that be added. Yes. You excuse your silence.
Or follow right along.
As you see fit. All right, I'd like to call Mr. Edwards. And Mr. Edwards, I'm going to have a seat. If you need to go over there. All right. And what I'm going to do is, as I'm asking you questions, if you could, instead of facing me, if you could still remain facing the board as best that you can.
Yeah, you can sit at the so you don't feel like you're on the spotlight.
All right, state your name for the board, please. And where do you live, Mr. Edwards?
Yes,
All right. Do it this.
All right, just repeat your address again?
463 Snowden Road.
All right. And how are you employed?
HRSA, Hemp Road Shipping Association.
Okay. And you build some houses?
Yeah.
Time to time?
I have my contractor's license. I've had roughly 16 years.
Okay. All right. About how many houses do you build a year?
Probably one, maybe if I get lucky, maybe two, but I dabble with a little bit of everything.
Okay. Are you the owner of the property at 436 Shawboro Road in Shawboro?
Yes, sir.
How long do you own that property?
I don't want to lie to you. It's not been super long. I obtained it from my grandparents.
Okay. All right, and touching on that, are you familiar with the property prior to your ownership of the property?
I am.
And how do you know, how are you familiar with the property?
My grandparents owned it. My mother lived there previous, and they wasn't able to keep it. So they had, and my uncle was going to take it over. And long story short, that's how I ended up with this mess.
Okay. All right. And was there a home located on the property prior
Yes.
to you constructing this home on the property?
Yes, it was.
All right. What type of home was it?
It was double wide.
Okay. And how long ago was it demolished?
I think my uncle actually took the dwelling down. I think they gave him a final on in the 18th. I think it was in that package. That's a little unfamiliar with that part of it because I didn't do that.
Okay. And after the demolition of the home, if you go out and look, if you're on the land itself, can you make out the footprint of the home?
Yeah, pretty basically it sits right in the same existing, maybe a little bit farther back because if you look on the in that packet, you'll see where it was a grease trap there. I've actually scooted the house back 5 foot to match what was already currently there.
All right. And when you say the package, you're talking about the septic permit that was issued?
Yes.
Yeah, that's on page 30 and 31 of the package that's been submitted to evidence. All right, and that septic permit that was issued, that's an accurate depiction, to your knowledge, of the septic system that exists on the property right now?
Oh, absolutely.
With the exception of the grease trap, which is shown there just prior to the full septic tank, correct?
Correct.
Is the grease trap still there?
No, I've removed that and filled that in because it's really not. It's obsolete now.
Okay. All right, and is the septic system on the property, is it still in good working order?
Yes, sir. Carver came out and inspected it, to the best of their ability. They looked at it and, I had it pumped out.
All right, when you say Carver, you're speaking of Kevin Carver from Albemarle Regional Health Services?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, and when you were contemplating purchasing this property and helping out your family, you were aware, you satisfied yourself that septic system was a good working system?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I had Albemarle septic come out, inspected, put new filters in it, especially you can see, you can't see through the septic, but my mother used it for years, when they lived there, and it was in good working. It's a mound system. It's a really good system in this area for the water level we have.
All right, and was that a big hurdle for you to clear in deciding that you were going to take this property on, given the alternative to using that septic system?
Absolutely.
Okay, and if you were unable to use that septic system, what type of system were you going to have to put in?
Probably engineered.
An engineered system?
Yes, sir.
And that would be a substantial cost if you would have to put in an engineered system?
Absolutely. I did one and told me it was $20,000. I haven't priced that. That'd be a step of reaching out, but.
Okay. All right. So when you made plans to build a home on the property, I want to just go through your considerations there. Did you consider the location of the old home, the demolished home?
I did.
And did you attempt to build very close or on the footprint of that old home?
Yeah, I actually putting a double wide there to kind of flip the land to make a quick profit, but it didn't. So I went back at the same footprint of what was already pre-existing there. That's pretty much what I basically based it on.
Okay. All right. So the existence of the old home and then the septic system was important there in your location.
Absolutely.
Okay. And you've already touched on this, but if that septic system were not be able to use the property to the rear of the septic system, describe that for me.
It's really low. It was just when I obtained the property, there was a lot of tree removal off of there, so it's really super low back there. I wish I would have took some pictures to show you back there. We can't. You're limited to, if you fill it in, what you're going to do to your neighbor. So you're limited to that too.
Okay. All right. Now, when you had your site plan drawn, who drew that for you?
Mr. Rackley.
Okay, and you relied on that at the time that you staked the house out, is that correct?
I did.
All right, and you, at the time that you staked the house out, you believed that you were well outside the 50-foot setback from Strawberry Road, is that correct?
Absolutely.
Tell me what the error was.
I went from, when we got this property, you can see the old permits, because the county doesn't even have them copies. We had to supply them to them when my grandparents bought that. I had a survey that was done, and I went from the pinpoints that they had on that survey, and then I measured them out. I took, and if you see in one of them packets, you can see a hand-drawn one that I submitted to Albemarle Regional to get my approval on the septic. That was the first original one. And if you look at that packet, it shows, it clearly states that I measured from the road. I put no variation in the road, between the variation in the road and the property line.
Just for the board's reference, he's talking about the survey on page 22 of your packet. Continue on, Mr. Edwards.
February 16th, 1957.
Correct.
That's what I kind of would put everything, not absolutely, had no idea that, it was going to be any issue at all.
All right, and when did you first become aware of the issue with the setback?
When the house is fully constructed, windows, not sign, excuse me, shingles, and they called me and said someone had acquired an interest in that they said the setback. And I just kind of really was lost for words. I was like, nah, I think you got it wrong, but apparently not.
Okay. All right, and again, if you were to move the home farther away from Strawberry Road, would you be able to use the existing septic system?
No.
All right. If you were to remove the front porch, or even a portion of the roof of the front porch, how will that affect the appearance of the home?
It's going to deface it really, really bad. I mean, in my personal opinion, it's going to be bad on my name personally. It's going to look terrible.
All right. So it's going to affect it aesthetically or appearance-wise?
Oh yeah,
How
absolutely.
about value? Is it going to impact the value of the property?
I'm sure. I mean, you're not going to no longer be able to sit on the porch and, have shade. That's the whole purpose of it. Because the sun is directly in that position. Most of the part of that house takes the brunt of it is the morning and afternoon it gets mine. But yeah, it's going to be.
All right. Do you have any intentions of enclosing that front porch?
Absolutely not.
Those are all the questions I have.
Okay. Anyone on the board, questions for Mr. Edwards?
I have a question for you, Mr. Edwards. According to your drawing that you provided the county, it shows that you were going to maintain 5 feet from the rear porch or deck back to the septic tank. Is that still 5 feet now?
Yeah, it's actually just a little bump out for the tub. Yeah, that's exactly where it is. I scooted it back as far as I could.
And it also looks like when you all had the foundation survey done, you found out that the lot wasn't quite as wide as it was originally thought. It looked like it was 100 foot on the old survey, and on the new one,
Yeah,
it shows 96.83, so it's a little bit more narrow.
Yeah, we're having that discussion when we close. I said, how does land shrink? But 57 to now, I guess it's different. Yeah, absolutely. It was,
So in the beginning, you were aware of the 50-foot setback, correct? Like you knew there was a 50-foot setback?
no, I wasn't aware of it. I've never built on the highway like that.
Okay.
And I never even had a clue that I had a different set of plans. And when I laid it out on that, it was just that lot, it had an attached garage to it, and it was too close to me. Because I don't know if you're aware of that piece of property, the ditches, I mean, we could stretch it it's probably 6 foot wide. That's a natural irrigation. It could probably never be filled in ever again. Because if it does, it's going to flood everybody on Snowed Road, including myself. But I had remotely any idea that if you look at the way that property line goes, unless you had a genie in the bottle, maybe you could guess that this thing went, because that ditch is so big, you would think the property line would be in the center of the ditch like normal property would be. But this thing goes haywire. Even the surveyor, when he did it, he said he had problems with the lot beside it when he surveyed it. So I really had like I say, I've had 4 inspections up to this point, and before any of it was ever brought to my attention, I don't know.
So when you measured, when you submitted your site plan and you measured the 66 feet, just remind me again where exactly you measured from, that where you thought that you were measuring from the right spot.
I went from that survey right there, and there's no definition between or defining point between the road and where the pins would be at. So I measured from the road, which would still gave me plenty of room, even if I would have been aware of the 50 feet. Trust me, I wasn't trying to put that house on the highway by no means.
Any other questions?
I'm not sure that Mr. Edwards could answer this question, but I'm sure there's somebody in here that can. If we granted the variance and left the roof as it is, if he decided to screen in the porch, not any, nothing, just screen, would that be considered closing it in that he could not do?
Lori?
If you're talking about just putting up screening on the inside of the posts and the railing and securing that would not be considered in closing it.
Just like want to keep the bugs out.
If you just want to keep the bugs out, and if you're going to make any type of further
nothing-
improvement,
Right, not a living room kind of thing, but just a screen to keep the mosquitoes out would be okay.
just the screening and the things it takes to secure that would be okay.
Okay,
And
thank
they
you.
wouldn't even need a permit for that.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? So if you were to, and you may have an idea of this figure, but if you were to have to remove the roof from that porch and re-engineer the roof of the house, roughly how much do you think that would cost you financially to?
In thousands. I mean, I haven't sat there and I've contemplated in my head how I'm going to do it, but I haven't broke it down. It's going to be very expensive because that porch is not normally. Most people will lay a roof line out and then they'll dye that roof into it, so there's a pre-existing roof back behind it. This one's not like this. This one's live frame, so it has rafters just like your gables run this way. Well, your gables, it has king rafters that come down, and you can walk from the inside of the interior of the house. If you were in the attic, you can walk onto that that porch, minus the soffit because you wouldn't want to step on that. But it's not an easy fix, nor could I remove part of it because I won't be complying with the building code because the uplift. See, that's why that porch has to be out to the existing part of that house, because you have to have tie downs. If you use 1/2 inch all thread, you got to be every 6 feet apart, on that. So I'm not going to be able to comply on the other end of it with them, And I wasn't even given an option as far as they said take the roof off, and I feel that it's terrible to that property. It's going to deface it terrible.
What kind of foundation do you have for the porch? Is it concrete? Is it brick? Is it wood?
It's a solid concrete footer, and then it's a solid 8-inch block around there. The whole house is 8-inch block, and then I have a wood deck with the decking is a Trex decking on it. I don't have concrete on the top of it.
Okay.
It's like a nice little extra feature. I think it looks better.
Okay.
So, as a builder, and I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but as a builder, just a rough estimate in your mind, how much you think it might cost, just ballpark?
I'm going to say it's by the time I spend several days out there messing with it and going, because I'm going to have to remove siding, everything to that. I'm going to just say 5,000 or better, easily. I mean, because you're not just removing. You can't just cut it, because I'm going to have to take that thing off in sections, because I have Trex underneath there, and it's not a magic cure to fix it. That's the only reason I went this far, is to, because it's that.
And I would think that it's all code for hurricanes and the wind rating and everything, and tied down?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And how and if I understand if you don't want to say this in a public forum, but if you can, how much has it cost you to build the house in total? Just ballpark. You don't have to give me.
You have to ask the boss back there. She keeps track of everything. I'd be lying to tell you, but probably I can tell you that lands is like the septic guy said, it's only good for holding the earth together. That's what that. As far as I had a nightmare from that ground up on that thing because of the soil, in this area, from the north end of Currituck is you have soil issues, and that was the other part of putting that house back in the pre-existing. There was a old footer there, so when the guy removed that, it caused soft spots in that one end, so I had to go down 6 feet to obtain a solid ground, that the engineer would allow me to get.
So just like a range, would you say it cost you somewhere between 50 and 100,000, or over 100,000?
100.
Over 100,000?
Right at 100, probably.
Okay.
If I'm understanding you correctly, you were saying that you use threaded rod through the foundation, through the walls, the exterior walls of the foundation. Are there threaded rods that are out towards the front of the porch area?
Yes, sir. There's 3 columns up there, and they have threaded rod that come up, and they catch the header at the top for uplift. That's what I was saying. Even if I was to comply, what do we run? 3 columns through the center of the porch. The porch is only 5 foot wide. So if we break that down, just go into half of that, and the columns are 6 by 6, roughly.
So the columns are hollow and the rod goes through.
Yes, sir. And they have to be attached in that footer. They have to be continuous from the footer up.
I asked for the wind rating on.
Yeah, and I think it's, I may be wrong, they changed it. I think it's 120 is what they have to be rated for, So can't shift them any because there's no footing in the middle of the porch anyways.
So it isn't possible to add a threaded rod between the end point where there's one now and the main house foundation, or is there a way to do that?
I couldn't put it in there because there's no foundation in there. I'll be running it to nowhere. It would pretty much be nothing. It won't comply.
That's why I said you'd have to re-engineer with steel beams and everything else. It's the only way to protect it from uplift. If you tried to take that off and just had a bit of an overhang.
Well, and then on top of it,
You have to redo the foundation in that case. That's what you have to do.
Yeah, and that I can't do that.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have one additional question for you. And speaking about the construction of the ceiling area above the porch, is it possible to remove the ceiling back the amount that they're asking and come upwards and have only soffit out to the end of the porch.
So I don't quite follow what you're saying. You're saying where the ceiling's at. Well, in order to get a gable in, you're going to have to the header across there. It runs across there. It's a double 2x8. It might be 2x10. But anyways, it has to have a full box almost on the outside of it, and then that sits in the interior of the wall, and it sits on a double stud. So you have to have that all together to support that roof, because a bundle of shingles is probably about 80 pounds. So you start, it needs to be setting where it's setting at. It's got my name on it, and that's my whole thing about doing all of this to get to this point where we're at right now. That's my main thing out of any of it.
In the back of the house, there's no porch or enclosure at all.
No, ma'am, just a little set of steps.
The only place where anyone would be able to sit out, and if it's screened in, to protect them from the bugs, keep the bugs out.
The porch, to be honest with you, unless you go back in and start removing siding, you're not going to screen that in, because it has two columns, and then your siding is continuous. To do it the correct way, unless you set something in there to get it fully bug proof, you would have to take and cut back the side and put two dummy posts inside of there, and then wrap them, and then to get it fully enclosed to where you're not going to get insects in there. It's really not going to be an option for someone to ever enclose it in any level of that. And on top of that, it's not a solid. It's a deck, pretty much. It's Trex decking down there is what it is. It's not concrete. It's not a permanent.
Bugs coming up through anyway.
Yeah. They might stand a good chance because it's a solid area right there. But
Okay, any further questions?
Mr. McCree probably has a few.
Yeah, Mr. McCree.
Mr. Edwards, you testified you have had a contractor license for about 16 years,
yeah, roughly.
and that you build 1 to 2 houses a year.
Yes, sir.
So it would be correct that you build anywhere from 16 to 32 houses?
Yeah, roughly. Some years I don't mess with it. Maybe I'll do garages, but I mean, yeah, maybe roughly, yeah.
And so how do you typically lay out a house on a lot? How do you determine its appropriate location to meet setbacks?
Well, most every house I've done has been in a subdivision, and I've always measured from the road, because subdivisions mostly typically have sidewalks and so on. So I'll just give you when I built in Lakes of Shiloh in Camden, and I measured from the road, and it has a wide ditch just like that one. But I was allotted a lot more room, so I scooted the house farther back because I wasn't cramped up with a septic system right there. That's what the whole determining factor of putting it there, because if it was my choice, that house would have been farther back. But I just didn't. I couldn't. The value is not there to eat that much cost.
So you don't typically check the platted right-of-way width or measure from the platted right-of-way width. You typically go from pavement?
That's what I've normally do, and I've never run into no issues ever. I've never been in front of no board like this.
With regard to this particular lot, when you were determining the location of the house, did you actually search for the pins on the property corners along the 34 right-of-way?
I spoke to the neighbor, and the only pin he was aware of is the one in the very back of the property. And defining the line of that is what he instructed me is the center of the ditch. So when I did my setbacks, that's what I went from. Actually, believe it or not, that property is wider than what it is. But luckily I'd measured from his property line and come in, and that's how I got my 2 setbacks on my side. And then from the front, pretty much the septic determined all the measurements from the front. That's where I came up with my measurements. I couldn't squeeze any more out of it. Like I would have loved to put it farther back.
But you didn't find any pins?
No, sir.
And are you a surveyor?
No, sir.
Trained as a surveyor?
Nope.
How did the surveyor perform his survey of the property?
Well, when I submitted him what my measurements were, and he went with my measurements, and I submitted him. He gave me a site plan, and it's just a very small house. I pinned it out where he just exactly where we had it going on. He went solely on what I provided for him, and then we was like this is no issue until what was brought to my attention, then he came out and did, it wasn't an official survey, but he found pins, and he had to actually create one on the other one because the ditch is so wide and it deteriorated, and he said maybe years ago it was there, but it's gone.
So you say in your application, let's see. Unknowingly, the site plans were drawn from the roadway, and using the pre-existing structure that was replaced, measurements were submitted to the surveyor for site plan. So were those measurements the drawing that appears at packet page 29, if I may approach? See what I'm talking about?
That was mine, and like I say, that was in their packet, and I didn't show any variation between the road and that's where 100% where I measured from.
And that's what you gave the survey? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the surveyor, he didn't come out to the property?
No, I don't know about that. I have no idea because them guys are in and out, so I couldn't speak for him. But I certainly 100% gave him that measurement that you have right there. Now, what he did after that, I don't know. But
So you don't know if he just drew a plat based on these measurements, or whether he actually went out and did any field work?
No, I don't know. I don't know how all that works, to be honest with you.
But you testified that you do know he came out and actually did field work on site after the encroachment was discovered.
Yeah, they asked me to provide one, and that's when I called him and said I need to see where my setback is. The determinant factor in all of this is if in a different setting, like if it was a big custom home, I would have had it spinned out, but it wasn't that situation because it was a small house, and I thought I was going in the same footprint. And never in a million years it would have been any issue like this.
Now, you're familiar with the adjacent properties?
Not really. I mean, as far as who has them or anything.
Well,
like
no, it's in terms of the topography, or I mean, are they low and wet like the back of yours?
Yeah, the neighbors over there, he had to put a mound system in his, and that's the highest point in his yard. His back of his yard floods the same as that one does. When we had that storm not too long ago, the whole back of that lot was underneath water.
In fact, I think you testified that from your experience or knowledge that from the north end of Coin Jock up to at least Shawboro, soil is just like yours.
Yeah, it can be. That's a requirement. I mean, if they have a map, that's what they require you to have soil samples done. It depending on what, I guess it's called geographic area you're in. But most of the soil in this area, you're going to get an engineered footer.
So a lot of problems with getting septic systems to work, whether it be the traditional or engineered type.
Mm-hmm. Depending on your lot size and so on.
And now are you going to be living in this house?
No, actually, the homeowners they're back here, and one of them, anyways, I actually have a contract on the house, but we ran into this situation, and we haven't been able to get it resolved because of the COVID stuff and everything's been kind of holding everything up.
Okay. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just one follow-up to that. Mr. Rackley first completed a site plan on the property based on the drawings that Mr. McCree was showing.
Yeah.
He did not actually survey the property at that time.
Not in my knowledge. No, I solely that first piece one I took from the septic permit, and I submitted that to Albemarle Regional which is not the dimensions are not 100% correct, but which we weren't in there.
Okay. And then he did actually survey after the setback issue was discovered.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay. All right, any further questions for Mr. Edwards? Okay, Mr. Edwards, you can grab your seat. Thank you. So, before we get into discussion here with the board, we've heard the the cases from both sides. I would like to ask Ms. Womble if she had a chance to read any of that North Carolina appeals case there, and has any thoughts on that.
Well, I'm certain that Mr. Brumsey and Mr. McCree would like to argue to the board regarding their position and their perspective of this case. And maybe once you guys get into discussion and comment, I may be able to comment further.
Okay.
Because you may have some additional questions regarding that based on their argument. Did we offer any public comment?
We did not yet, but we can do that now before we get into.
And I did, though I had no doubts Mr. Brumsey was correct in his citation of the statute. I did pull that statute, and you can attach a condition to a variance. I did want to just let you know that. I told you I was going to look it up.
Right, okay.
And I did, though I had no doubts Mr. Brumsey was honest in his representation. I think maybe I can give some comment, maybe answer some questions you may have based on their argument of the case.
Okay. And does it speak to any conditions on conditions, or is just a flat ability?
Are you talking about the case itself?
No, the citation where it does allow conditions to be placed in variances.
No, it just says that reasonable conditions can be placed on variance approvals. So I guess if you have something in mind, when we get to that point, we can talk that out a little bit and see what you're thinking.
Okay. Thank you. All right. At this time, I'd like to ask if there is any public comment. Anyone would like to speak on this case that has not been sworn in? All right, hearing none, I think we're going to, at this point, close the public hearing portion of this hearing, and we're going to go into some discussion of what we've heard here tonight amongst the members of the board. I would like to remind the board as we get into these discussions that, we do have the variance review standards that have to be met, and what I'd like to do is maybe go through each one of those standards individually, and with the understanding that all of those standards have to be met in order for us to grant a variance. So if there's some that are met and some aren't, then we're not able to grant a variance under that condition. But in this case, I'd like us to have some discussion of the individual standards that we need to discuss in order to grant variances.
And just before we dive into discussion, the attorneys, I'm sure, want an opportunity. Did you guys want to be heard additionally? So just their arguments do need to be part of the public hearing record, and then we can let them argue, and then we can go into discussion.
Okay, that sounds great. All right, so we'll go ahead and start with Mr. McCree.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have before you, and you've gone through this before, the required elements you must consider as to whether to grant a variance. But I just want to highlight those requirements and apply the evidence that's been presented tonight, and to then state why you're unable to make the requisite findings to be able to grant this variance. The first finding is the unnecessary hardship will result from strict application of the ordinance. And I think often in these kind of cases, obviously, it is the ordinance and its impact on the given applicant or the property that may well be causing some hardship. Whether that is unnecessary is something that you have to find. And that means that it's more than an inconvenience or preference for a more lenient standard in a given situation. And while cost can be a determining factor, the applicant must show substantial and undue nature of additional cost as compared to others subject to the same setback requirements. Now, Mr. Brumsey has handed out and mentioned to you in his opening this case, Currituck versus Town of Surf City, which stands for that principle, that you may and should consider the cost as a factor, not a determining factor, but as a factor, and that hardships resulting from good faith reliance on surveys and permits are eligible for a variance. That's basically what the Currituck court has held. But we would submit that the facts of that case are not the facts of this case. The facts of that case, it's a dentist and his wife who, as the court says, hired Charles Riggs and Associates to conduct a survey of the property in preparation for a construction project. And they as apparently non-builders, unprofessionals in the building trade, relied upon, I guess, then this survey in order to apply for a building permit, and construction commenced when their problem then followed. In this case, you've heard testimony from Mr. Edwards that he's been a licensed contractor for about 16 years. He acknowledged he's built maybe 16 to 32 houses, or if not that many houses, he's done other construction work during the course of that time. He then drew out his own site plan, and well, perhaps it's not exactly clear whether, and he doesn't know whether the surveyor went to the site or not. I think you might come to the conclusion that the surveyor did not come to the site when he prepared the site plan that was then submitted to the county for building permit, but indeed did go to the site and actually do the appropriate field work when the encroachment was discovered. When you look at the two drawings, you will see that the numbers are different around the perimeter of the property, or even the setback on some of the sides are different from that which was submitted to the county than that which was submitted when the encroachment was found. So we would say that the Currituck case is different and is not applicable to this particular situation. Secondly, you must find that the hardship results from conditions peculiar to the property, not a condition that's general to the neighborhood or the community, but something that's related to this particular piece of property, its location, its size, its shape, its topography. Something different and unique from other properties in the neighborhood and other properties in the community. Variance is not appropriate for a condition or hardship that is shared by the community as a whole. Well, everyone in the community, as you heard Ms. Cicero testify, that has property on a major arterial in the county is required to meet this very same setback. And Mr. Edwards himself testified about the wetness and low-lying areas in the back of this property, and rather than expend monies to provide for an engineered system, was doing what he could to keep the current septic system in place, and that's fine. But the conditions on his property, from his own testimony, is no different from his neighbor's property, who he acknowledged are also low, is no different than, as he testified, from properties from Currituck through Shawboro that he was aware of that had the same kind of situations, having to deal with soils that may not be compatible or suitable for a traditional septic system and might well require something else like an engineered system. The bottom line, personal circumstances are not a basis for a variance. It relates to the uniqueness of the property. Thirdly, the hardship cannot be self-created. It must not result from the actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. And we would submit that, unfortunately, that finding cannot be made. Indeed, the hardship is due to the actions of the property owner, who was a general contractor, who testified that he didn't find or really make a search for the pins along the front right-of-way, but relied upon perhaps some comments from a next-door neighbor to give him an idea of maybe where some pins were from which he could pull. He's not sure as to whether the surveyor even went to the site, but he submitted his own hand drawing to the surveyor. And again, we submit that that's what appears to be what was actually prepared and submitted to the county building permit officer, that the true survey with site work or field work by the surveyor happened only after the encroachment was learned. And then lastly, while we break it out more in the UDO, some writers say that the variance must be consistent with the intent of the ordinance, secure public safety, and ensure that substantial justice is achieved. With regard to the intent, and I know it's been frustrating to this board in this case and in other cases, in fact, your last meeting last year, and in fact, I would note that you in fact approved those minutes from that meeting tonight, and you will recall that there was an encroachment by that applicant of 2 feet into a setback area, and they were required to comply with the terms of the ordinance and remove that encroachment. And while your decisions are not precedent setting, certainly your findings in cases with similar facts or circumstances should be the same. You heard Mrs. Cicero herself say that a variance would not cause a public safety concern, and I think we would certainly say again that a variance would secure the public safety, or at least not endanger the public safety. But with regard to whether substantial justice is achieved, that element really is for you to determine and find fairness to the community and neighbors, that the hardship is peculiar to the property, not to the applicant. As there's something about the property that is not shared by the rest of the community. Because if everyone bears the same problem or circumstances, here with bad soils, low wet area, might have to put in an engineered system rather than using an old typical septic system, then one lucky person, as some have written on this issue, one lucky person shouldn't be relieved through the variance when nobody else is going to get the same relief. And so based upon that, we would submit that, and quite frankly, unfortunately, that the evidence does not provide for you being able to find that the elements for a variance have been met and that the variance should be granted. Thank you.
Thank you.
First, thank you again to the board for your consideration and time tonight. And I'm going to go through basically the same elements that Mr. McCree did and relate those to the Currituck case, which is good law here in North Carolina. First, the unnecessary hardship, and we've touched on this. Cost, although not determinative, is certainly a factor in your determining whether an unnecessary hardship would result from an application of the ordinance. And here we have a good working septic system that, if not, is not allowed to be used. We're going to have a very major cost to put in an engineered system that is going to cost a great deal of money. So certainly there would be some unnecessary hardships related to the non-use of that system. And the number two, and that hardship directly relates to the peculiar nature of this property. And I would pose that the existing septic system is a part of the peculiar nature of this property. It is something that has to be considered when you're determining whether you would grant the variance or not. So we have Mr. Edwards attempting to replace an older manufactured home with a new stick-built home using a system that is already in place. That is exactly what the county should be wanting, frankly. And we're asking that the history of the property be noted in determining the peculiar nature of this case. As far as the creation of the hardship and how we got to this point, Mr. Edwards has been completely honest about how we got to this point. It was a good faith, unintentional error on his part that has gotten us to this point. And it is comparing that to the Currituck case, similar circumstances. It was a unintentional good faith error that got them to that setback violation. And that setback violation, again, was 7.2 inches out of a 7.5-foot setback. If you look at it percentage-wise, that was an 8% variation from the allowable. If you look at Mr. Edwards, we have a 4% variation from the ordinance. So just a very, very slight variation that was clearly not intentional and can be allowed under the ruling in the Currituck case. And finally, the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. You all touched on it, and Ms. Cicero tried to answer those questions as best she can. If this porch is allowed in its current state, the ordinance is going to be met. We're going to be in a place that is going to comply with the spirit of the ordinance. It's going to address what the ordinance is attempting to address. Public safety is not going to be harmed. There's not going to be any negative impact on any of the adjoining properties. We have, again, a residential property next door. Just to the northeast of this property is the county disposal site. This home that he's built is an improvement to this area, and we want to allow that to remain in place. When you look at the overall, the substantial justice is a big term. It encompasses a lot, but I think when you look at the whole record here, all the facts, and try to determine what's the right thing here, then you have to conclude that the variance should be granted. So, thank you, and we appreciate your time again.
Thank you. All right. So at this point, I'd like to initiate discussion with the board, as both attorneys have said here, both lawyers have said here tonight, that there are the standards that we have to meet, and I think that's where our discussion needs to, frankly, it needs to begin and end with those standards, because that's what we're charged with doing. And I'd like to start off by starting a discussion of the first standard, which is the alleged hardship is suffered by the applicant as a result of the application of this ordinance. In my mind, I think that is an affirmative in this case. I do think that that this is going to be a significant hardship for the applicant to remove and basically re-engineer the roof of the house. That's just my thought. Mr. Edwards said that he thought it would be upwards of $5,000 to do that. That's getting to be more than 5% of the total cost of the house. And one thing that I do want to speak on here, as we talk about this, I I'm very, as Mr. McCree pointed out, I'm very in tune to the idea of being consistent and, not necessarily precedent setting, but, we did just hear a case that was similar in a lot of ways to this one. But there is one big difference that I'd like us to maybe talk about. The last case was an addition to an existing dwelling. And this case is really more about the dwelling itself. I think that's a subtle distinction, but I think it is a distinction that we need to consider. But I mean, on that first point, I think in my mind, there's no doubt that there is going to be a hardship to correct in this situation for this applicant. Any thoughts on that?
I agree with you.
I do too.
Ms. Bell?
Yeah, I do. Like I said, I rode by this house earlier this afternoon. It's a cute little house, and that little porch just adds a bit to it. And to have to, I don't get it. Like, you can meet the requirements if you just take off the top. Well, then why don't you take off the whole thing? To me, it's kind of weird, but I agree with you, sir.
I understand when Lori explained it, that, future people can then enclose it and it can become part of the house. But as the builder said, there's no way to do that. You'd have to redo everything, and you'd need a permit to do that, what he was talking about. So they could shut it down at that point. Without that porch, it doesn't look right.
No, it would look kind of weird if they took that top off. Plus, you think, and I know there's so much of this stuff that we're not supposed to consider. I learned all this from being on the planning board. But if nothing else, it provides shelter for people who are coming into the house if it's pouring down rain
Exactly.
or whatever. It gives you that little bit of comfort that you don't have to stand there and get drowned before you can get in the door.
Well, and as your attorney, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to again remind you, yes, there are certain things you can't consider and should not consider. You got to stick with the grounds here. Obviously my job is to make sure we keep the record in line and straightforward. So I know those are considerations that you do, but in your discussion, I think Troy gave us his reasoning for why he felt like this was different and that there was a hardship suffered. And then also just a reminder, in your discussion, be sure you talk about your reasoning, because when you do vote in the affirmative or against, then I need that information in order to appropriately prepare an order. So
Don't you need to go take a break or something?
I can't do that, I'm sorry.
Too bad.
Yeah, and I appreciate that clarification, Ms. Womble. I'm looking at each of these standards individually on their own. That's what I'd like to do, look at them individually on their own, and then let's come back and see how they look as a whole. And in this case, the first one doesn't really matter to me how we got here for this question. What I'm looking for is there going to be a hardship on the applicant, and so that's how I arrived at my decision on that one.
I have one comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
In reference to the first test, the UDO was in existence before the house was begun to be constructed. So it wasn't like the UDO was after the construction.
Exactly.
But rules were in place
Yes.
before they began construction.
Yes, and that's a very key point, and I think that point really is going to come into play with some of the other standards as we kind of go down through this. Any more discussion on the first standard? The next two standards, in my mind, they're they're kind of the same. They're kind of similar standards. The hardship relates to the applicant's land, such as location, size, topography. And then the third one, the hardship is unique or nearly so, rather than one shared by many surrounding properties. And in this case, I think the unique thing about this property, I think, really kind of centers around the discussion that we had with the septic system, the existing septic system, which created a limited footprint, especially when you consider the much larger setbacks that are required for a major arterial. So I do think that the existence of the existing septic, while not the cause of this issue, I do think that definitely played a role.
I think that was the foundation of starting everything going.
Right, and Mr. Edwards said, at one point earlier tonight, he said that if he could have moved it back further, he would have. And I think he would have. But that starting point with the existing septic, I do think it's an unreasonable thought that an existing working septic would be ripped out and a brand new engineered system put in. I don't think that is a reasonable expectation for this property. And then, of course, the discussion of the back half of the property being wet and low. Certainly there is no place else on this property for this house. So I do think that in this case, this property did have some unique features to it in that it was being built on the footprint of an existing property, and really nowhere else to put the house itself. Now, maybe the house could have been designed smaller. That's a question. But I think I do think there's a unique factor in the dimensions and the existing septic of this property. Any thoughts on that?
I have a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
The applicant, Mr. Edwards, stated that if it had been a big house, he would have had it pinned, meaning he would have hired a surveyor to come out to do it. The fact that he did not hire a surveyor initially to come out to verify the distances is what caused this situation now.
Yep.
If that had been done originally, he perhaps may have changed the design of the home somewhat in order to afford a deck or a porch, either recessing it back somewhat so it would not fall into the required distance, or changing the layout of the home, perhaps putting it on the side instead of the front. But there could have been modifications made at that time after a survey would have been performed.
Yes. Any other thoughts on those two? The next standard, the hardship is not the result of the applicant's own actions, and I think that speaks to some of the comments that you've been making, Mr. Currituck, and this is where I'm not I'm not totally clear, and I would like some clarification on the original site plan, and was there a surveyor involved or not? I feel like there was a surveyor, but maybe there was not an on-site survey done. Do you have any recollection of that part of the discussion?
I would state that by the testimony of Mr. Edwards, he stated that he gave the measurements to the surveyor, and the surveyor drew out from his measurements. And it appears from the testimony given tonight that no surveying actually occurred prior to the discovery of the setback issue.
Right. Right, that was my understanding, but I just wanted to be clear on that. And that's kind of where I would ask Ms. Womble. Mr. McCree laid out some differences between the Turret case and this one, and wondering if you may be able to give us some guidance on, certainly, I think certainly when it gets down to it, that this hardship is the result of the applicant's own actions. However, I don't know the details of the Turret case to understand how intention may play in that.
So, my review of the Turret case is, both attorneys reported on the case saying, this was a new construction, and the parties before construction did actually get a survey. And so the couple who was constructing this new home actually hired a surveyor to do a full survey before construction. Now, the court does go through some analysis regarding pecuniary loss and unnecessary hardship, discussing a lot of the things that you guys have discussed tonight in terms of the cost that it would take, how much the setback, how much the encroachment was. In this case, it was 7.25 inches. The court compared these facts to some other cases that have gone through the courts in North Carolina, where there were setbacks of variances requested for 25 feet and some much larger things. But at the very end, and I think this is probably the there's two things I think that are important to note is, on the last page I'm referring to for your reference, it says, in the case before us, the Hunters, who is the subject family in this case, followed the necessary procedures to obtain a building permit before they began construction on their property, and the hardship that the Hunters faced was not one of their own making. The variance requested was not directly contrary to the ordinance, nor did it conflict with the purpose of the ordinance. And specifically, the court was referencing that the Hunters hired a surveyor and relied on a professional. And in fact, the facts in this case, there were actually 3 conflicting surveys of the same property. And the court said later, in this case, there were no independent circumstances which made it difficult to conduct an accurate survey of the Hunters' property, or that any showing the Hunters' survey was in fact inaccurate. So the Hunters had a formal survey done before they applied for a building permit, and then there was a question about encroachment, and a neighbor or someone submitted an alternative survey of their property that conflicted with their initial survey, so they went out and rehired someone else, and they had a 3rd survey. And so the court took that into consideration, that they relied on a survey, and then obviously there were multiple done that didn't match. And so I think the question really is a factual question for you guys, not so much a legal question. This court found that the hardship was not created by the Hunters, by the family, okay? And so I think the question really goes back to you, which is, how was the hardship created in this case? Was it from the site plan? Was it from the survey? Where did that kind of start? And I think that's where you need to make that analysis about this step.
Okay. All right, thank you. You must have gotten an A in reading comprehension. I don't know how you read all of that fast, but pretty good.
That's why she went to law school.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so any further discussion on that aspect?
I don't know if there was a site plan done by a surveyor, would that have been turned into Lori, and then at that point, then Lori would have said, no, you're not in compliance if you put it there? or,
So I think it's important to delineate the difference between a site plan and a survey.
well, I mean,
Yeah.
of a survey,
Yep, So if there was a formal survey done ahead of time before the building permit was applied for and received, then certainly if there was a survey, the applicant would have known where to plot the house accurately based on a formal survey. He wouldn't have put it within the encroachment or maybe redesigned. I think you guys talked about moving the porch or making the porch shorter. So if there was that survey, he would have known then, and if he had submitted with a survey within the encroachment, then staff certainly would have said, you need to make a change here. We can't give you a permit because you're within the setback. So if there was a formal survey, because the site plan that staff received and that the applicant submitted showed the house was well beyond the setback. So no one, the applicant or staff, had any indication that at that juncture that there was an encroachment.
okay.
So do we know if the surveyor had any review responsibility with that site plan, or did it just go through this, from the applicant through this surveyor, and there was not any official surveyors look at it?
So my recollection of the testimony was that of Mr. Craddock's, which was the applicant provided the measurements to the surveyor, and the surveyor drew a site plan based on his measurements. I believe his testimony was also that he doesn't know if they went out to the site or not. But upon review of your packet, you'll note that the site plan does say this is not a formal survey on it. So I believe the fact is unknown whether the surveyor ever went on to the site or not, though I think there's a delineation between a site plan and a survey, a formal survey.
Right, absolutely.
I think we can make the assumption based on the initial site plan that the surveyor did not go to the property, or they would have known the differences in the measurements of the lot as was shown on the foundation plan that was submitted by the surveyor.
Right.
Well, if they did actual site work.
Yeah, if he had gone out, he would have, at least thrown one or two measurements to make sure that what he was dealing with was correct. He should have, as a professional, right?
Yeah.
You don't put your name to it. As an engineer, you don't put your name to it unless you're right.
Right, you don't seal it. The only thing I do remember Mr. Edwards saying is that when the surveyor did finally go out there, once they determined that there was an issue, that the surveyor was only able to find one monument, if you will, and everything else was not available anyway. There was nothing there on the road. And it's interesting that they probably obviously had to use some type of metal detector to find the bent axle in the ground. That's the one pin that was in the front, and I heard him say somebody that probably had to put in another corner, I think at the front of the property. And the back property pins were probably found, but so by that token, that would be a difficult thing for a layperson to find in looking at a site plan. If there was nothing there to find except something underground. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying right or wrong, but
Right.
yes, had they requested a site plan, a survey be done prior to drawing up the site plan, we probably wouldn't be sitting here this evening. But the one thing I will say is there was very little of anything on the ground to tell you where the actual corners were of that property, based on the testimony I heard tonight.
Okay, when you look at the foundation survey, if you look at the corners, it tells you what was found or what was not found. In the upper two, you see where it says EIP, that means existing iron pipe.
Correct.
So they found two
Back.
points that perhaps were underground that were not visible. And they bent axle at the front left corner, and in the control corner, that may have been found through
That was the one he thought was
GPS
probably
measurements.
set. That was the one it was stated in the testimony that the surveyor indeed had to set one corner. That's probably the one they set. Because most surveyors wouldn't use a bent axle as your pin for the corner.
Okay. Any other discussion on that one? All right, the next one, I don't think we need to go through because I think the county, based on the packet, is in agreement with this one, that the variance will not authorize the initiation of a non-conforming use of land. And so that gets us to the last one. The requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of this ordinance, such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. I think we heard from the testimony that if we were to grant this variance, it would not create a public safety issue. I think there was some discussion of the concept of substantial justice, and as Mr. Brumsey said, allowing for this variance would allow 96% of the required setback to remain. So from a public safety standpoint, I don't see that this would do anything to harm public safety, and substantially adversely affect the 50-foot setback from the major arterial. Any thoughts on that one? All right, hearing none, out of the standards that we're tasked with reviewing, in my opinion, and based on what I've heard here tonight, I could feel very confident with granting 5 of the 6. The hardship not being the result of the applicant's own actions, that one is a little tougher. Do we want to have any further discussion on that, or?
I don't have a comment about that in particular, but I would like to make a comment about the UDO in general.
Yes.
On packet page 10, under staff analysis, it talks about in section 3.3.3F, dimensional standards requires a single-family dwelling in agricultural zoning district to maintain a 50-foot setback from the major arterial street. Where this appears to have a conflict is in the definition section of the UDO, where it talks about the measurement must begin at the right-of-way, whereas some confusion could be found here because it doesn't say from the major arterial streets right-of-way. It just says major arterial street. So in that section, it's sort of a conflict where it's not specific. It's more of a general statement.
Right.
But I could see where and a layperson would have difficulty in determining what that really meant. Did it mean actually measure from the street, or did it mean measure from the right-of-way like it states in the definition section? Right.
And speaking of the UDO, I've spent very much of my career being an interpreter of rules and regulations in the environmental world. I was a state regulator for 20 years, so I do understand how rules and regulations are written, and certainly they have to be taken, in their entirety. And where there are definition sections of rules and that sort of thing, that is part of the rule as well. I do agree with you that that there's the potential for confusion whenever there's a rule that's not clearly specified. In this case, as you said, kind of the plain language says, from the major arterial, which, the plain language reading of that could lead one to believe that it's 50 feet from the road. I do agree with you on that. All right, Anyone have anything else?
I have one more comment. And this is speaking about Attorney Brumsey's comments where he was talking about the existing septic system might have to be changed if we were to deny this request. And I don't believe that to be true. The existing septic system was the basis for the location of the house. And they located the dwelling, the proposed dwelling, based on where the septic tank was in order to keep the distances required by the health department. So if we did deny the request, it does not affect the location of the septic system. It only affects whether or not they have to remove the covered area of the front porch.
Point taken. All right. No further discussion? Do I have a motion regarding this item?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to deny the variance based on the fact that only, it appears that one of the 5 tests have been met. The requested variance is not consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of this ordinance because it only meets one of the 5 review standards that we went over just moments ago. And the applicant can meet the required setback provided the roof is removed from the front porch. And the hardship definitely is a result of the actions of the applicant. If there had been a survey performed prior to construction, we wouldn't be here this evening.
Okay, do I have a second?
I would like to make a motion to approve it. I think if we just take common sense, and I know we go by those 5 rules, and I'm not 100% positive that there was intent on his part to circumvent the rules. I think he made an honest mistake, and I understand that the roof rule, as Lori said it, is so that it does not become part of the home, so that the home is now encroaching on the roadway. So if we put a stipulation in there that that porch is never to be enclosed and become part of the home, and if it does become part of the home, it has to have heating and electrical, which you need permits for to run, in any HVAC guy will tell you that. If we make that stipulation, then we're still in the spirit of improving our neighborhood and having this home look as beautiful as it does right now.
And if I could just procedurally jump in, and I'm so sorry, I hate to be the stickler, but again.
I know.
I got to keep the record straight. So we actually have a motion on the floor, so I was letting you go because I want you to be able to discuss and have comment and discussion on Mr. Craddock's motion, but I need you to withdraw your motion because we have one on the floor, and then once there's a vote on Mr. Craddock's motion, assuming it's not dispositive, then you can then make your motion.
Okay.
Okay.
So I
And I'm so
remove
sorry
my
about,
motion.
you can keep discussing, and I'm not trying to cut you off.
Okay.
We just can't have your motion on the floor while his motion is on the floor.
Okay.
Thank you.
So do we have a second for Mr. Craddock's motion?
Okay, if there's no second, then his motion fails, and the floor would be back open again for another motion to be made.
Okay, do we
Mr.
have a
Chairman,
motion?
I would like to make a motion to approve it
Okay,
with the stipulation that it's never to be enclosed and never to become part of the home, the inside of the home.
And so one thing that I would like I think you guys covered all of the grounds in terms of why you felt like they were a yes, except for you never really resolved was this hardship caused by the applicant. So if you are going to vote with Ms. Bontemp's motion, I think we need some more facts about how you were deciding in that fashion, if you were headed that direction.
right.
I don't feel that he did it deliberately. He should be more knowledgeable in getting a survey. I totally agree with, there's so many builders out there that build and never get surveys done and don't have problems because they know many of the rules, and he didn't know this rule, and he came real close. And it's only about from here to here that it's encroaching. And to have the bottom okay, but not the top, it just, I understand the UDO and I understand why it was written, but I think we should make an exception. I don't think there was any malice in what he did.
And so beyond malice, I think you guys also had some discussion about the verbiage in the ordinance as well. And so if anybody else had any other content and why that you felt that this was not, we have, generally with variances, we have a lot of good-meaning people who come before the board who did not intend or did not mean, and I would say, I can't particularly think of a time, but maybe 99% of the time they come in without having ever intended to have any sort of violation of the variance. So I think you need some additional discussion about other reasoning why.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I think that's a very, very valid point. I do have some very serious concerns about the language in the UDO, as Mr. Currituck brought up.
Chairman, could
Yes, sir.
I interrupt you for a
Sure.
second? Am I correct in saying, Ms. Womble, there can be no discussion until a second has been made?
Probably. You probably need a second. I think we rolled right into discussion
Yes,
the
we
last time,
did.
but you need a second to Ms. Bontemps' motion, and then we
Okay.
can discuss further.
All right. Do I have a second for Ms. Bontemps' motion?
I'll second.
All right, we have a second. So with that said, I think before we take a vote on that, we do need to have that discussion. That, as I mentioned before, the language in the UDO could certainly cause one to misinterpret that requirement. And a question that I have for the staff, maybe if they could answer it, in the UDO, in that section that speaks to the setbacks for the major arterials, is there anything in that section of the UDO that would direct the layperson to other parts of the UDO to clarify what that setback is intended? And I ask that question because, in some ways that this case is very similar to the one that we had the last time with the sunroom, but that case, the staff referenced a different part of the UDO that was subject to the subdivisions sections of the UDO, and if my memory serves me correctly, that section of the UDO made more specific reference to the setbacks from the property line than this.
And Mr. Chairman, just to add a point, is that last case that we were discussing, that was in 2019, was not located on a major arterial as well.
Right, that's right.
They also had not had a survey prior to construction.
That's right. That's right. And like I said, in my recollection, I don't have that section of the UDO that applied to that sunroom case in front of me, but my recollection was that there was a reference to measurement. The setback was measured from the property line. In this case, it does not say that. So certainly there's other there's other parts of the UDO, I guess, maybe in the definitions section or the chapter 10, the definitions and measurement section that would clarify that. But the plain language of the citation, I'm not clear that that's totally clear, so maybe you could clear that up.
You're correct, Mr. Chairman. Chapter 10 would be where we'd go for measurements and definitions. Front setback, and this is in the first part of Chapter 10. We're talking about measurements, rules of measurements. And a front setback is the area of a lot where no building may be permitted that extends from one side lot line to the other side lot line and projects inward into the lot from the ultimate street right-of-way edge. So right there, that front setback is defined by the area back from the ultimate street right-of-way edge. And then the major arterial setback is also in this section. The area of a lot where no building may be permitted that extends from the ultimate street right-of-way edge of a major arterial street inward into the lot. For the purposes of this ordinance, major arterial streets include US 158, NC 168, NC 34, NC 136, NC 615, and NC 12.
Okay, and so as Chapter 3, where we are with the what's that? Is that agricultural?
Yes.
Yeah, Chapter 3. So we're in Chapter 3. So how can you tell me how the general provisions of the UDO and Chapter 3 connect with Chapter 10? Such that the average person would be able to know that the 50-foot setback referenced in Chapter 3 is to be measured from the property line or the right-of-way versus from the major arterial.
That's where you may need just a little bit of familiarity with and not necessarily just a UDO, Unified Development Ordinance, or zoning regulations, but any type of regulatory document. So if you are looking at section 3.3.3 for the ag district, the AG agricultural district, it does have the minimum major arterial setback for traditional development, but then there is typically a glossary, a definitions, or some addendum to the regulations that go in and clarify, how these terms should be interpreted, or the definition of these terms. So maybe it's not crystal clear for someone not familiar with the regulatory document, but that would be typically how this would be handled. And this is for any other type of regulation, I'm sure. Sorry. So it's not crystal clear, but maybe it would just take a little bit of further investigation. That chapter is there. This is on the website. And there's always picking up the phone call or putting in contact to county staff on this as well.
Right, okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to add briefly, listening to Mr. Edwards, I do not think he did anything trying to pull the wool over somebody's eye and getting these 2 feet that he didn't think anybody would realize. But I think the biggest thing in his mind, from what I've heard, was that septic tank. Being able to use the tank in the field and everything without having to destroy it and start all over again. And as someone else said, the location of that house ain't the best in the world. The dump's on one side, the school's a little further south, and across the street is all that solar farm. Mm-hmm. So, it's not like it's a prime area. But I think he was just doing the best that he could. And, it was mentioned that he's a contractor. Well, so, we can't, I'm a nurse. I can't remember every little rule and regulation that there is in my field. But I just feel like, in my heart, that he did the best he could with what he was dealt.
No, thank you. Any,
I'd like to tag on to Ms. Bell's comment. I agree 100% with what Ms. Bell said. I don't believe he had any ill intention of doing anything, but the fact remains that there was no survey done prior to construction. If that had been done, we wouldn't be here tonight because he would have been in compliance. And whether that was a human mistake, I mean, we all make mistakes, just like Ms. Bell said, and you can't remember every detail like Ms. Bell said. But ultimately, if that had been done, we wouldn't be here tonight. It would have been in compliance.
If the surveyor was right.
We assume that the professional is right. Yes, ma'am.
But in the other case that the attorneys argued, they had 3 surveyors with 3 different measurements.
Right, but that was performed before construction. This one had not been performed before construction.
Yep. All right, any other discussion? All right, so we have a motion, Ms. Bontemps, and we have a second. So I'm going to go ahead and take a vote.
And just to clarify, her motion was to approve with conditions that the porch never be enclosed.
Never be enclosed and become part of the home, because that's the big thing for the UDO, that it would be the home would be actually too close to the roadway, and that's what they don't want if it has a roof over it. So by making that stipulation, that takes that right out of the equation.
I just wanted to be everyone to be clear what the motion was and the condition that she
Yes,
proposed.
yes. All right, everyone clear on that? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
I was opposed.
Yes.
You didn't ask for opposing.
Yes, you're right. All in favor, all opposed, say nay,
Nay.
for the record. Motion carries 4-1 tonight, and I think we're done. Do we have any announcements before we adjourn tonight?
Like the chairman said earlier, the Glenmore Ridge appeal will be heard in October, at the October meeting, and
Is that the one that's been pushed off and pushed off and pushed off?
For a year.
Yes.
Yeah.
okay. And we did, just to keep you all informed, something that came out of not necessarily came out of, but your case from last August, where there was the concern over the encroachment of the sunroom into the setback. And I'm sure you all have heard about the driveways and different things about impervious surface and lot coverage going on. The Board of Commissioners did codify in June that lots 40,000 square feet or less would have for new construction, a new principal structure, so your new house. Before final inspection, we now require an as-built survey to help catch some of these issues that are coming up, and maybe not have helped the sunroom necessarily, but would have established.
Did they take that down?
They did, or they.
They took off the part that was encroaching into the setbacks.
Oh, okay.
It was a corner.
Yeah, it was a corner.
But then that would having that would then establish a good basis for anybody then that wants to come along, add a shed, add a sunroom, add something else we have that now required for all new primary structures, principal structures on lots 40,000 square feet or less.
It's good, okay.
I have a question regarding the recordation of that.
That would get retained in staff's files. As far as a requirement, it would just be, now the homeowner has the option to record that, but it would submit to us to ensure that lot coverage is being met, setbacks are being met, and things, maybe reduce cases that's coming before you for these small things.
All right. Anything else on announcements? All right, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.